Hello, everybody, and welcome to Museum London's panel discussion on the Wounded exhibition. My name is Anita Bidanosti, and I am the Curator of Public Programs here at Museum London. And I welcome you all. Thank you so much for joining us. To first acknowledge where we are speaking from, in the spirit of truth and reconciliation, we would like to acknowledge that Museum London operates within the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Attawandaron, and Wendat peoples. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is the homeland of the Chippewa of the Thames First Nation, Oneida of the Thames First Nation, and Munsee Delaware Nation. We also recognize the contribution of Métis, Inuit, and other Indigenous peoples, both in shaping and strengthening this community in particular, and our province and country as a whole. If you would like to learn more about the treaties in the area that you're coming from, you can go to native-land.ca. There's an amazing interactive map there that has a lot of history and information about the treaty territories. And just to speak to a local way we can support our First Nations if you're in and around London or outside and want to assist. The local Chippewa of the Thames First Nation are building a traditional Anishinaabe roundhouse, and if you felt like you could support them in any way, they have a GoFundMe page where we can help support their current efforts. I'd like to introduce our curator that's going to be hosting tonight. And please do, as the evening goes along, post any questions or comments in the chat. You will not be able to see them. They'll be for the panelists, but we'll be doing a little Q&A at the end. And if we can, we'll try to get to your questions as they come up. Amber Lloydlangston is Museum London's Curator of Regional History and has held this position for 7 years. There's Amber, welcome to the screen. Prior to this, Amber spent 10 years at the Canadian War Museum as an assistant historian. She studied history and French at McMaster University and obtained a Master of Museum Studies from the University of Toronto and a doctorate in history from the University of Ottawa. In addition to her work at Museum London, Amber also teaches Introduction to Museology, a course at Western University in the Public History Master's Program, as well as Museums in Context for the Ontario Museums Association. Welcome, Amber.
Thank you. So I'm just going to explain a little bit. First of all, welcome everybody. It's wonderful to have all of you join us, and we're quite a good group, so this is very exciting. I'm just going to explain how our evening is going to roll out. We are going to welcome Stephen Thorne to speak first. I will do a brief introduction. Following Stephen's presentation, we're going to invite our three wonderful veterans, individuals who are depicted in Stephen Thorne's photography, to share some of their thoughts. And then finally, we're going to invite Canadian War Museum Cold War historian Dr. Andrew Burtch to do his presentation, at which point we will open the floor up for some questions. And I will be keeping an eye on the Q&A, so I will be looking to choose some wonderful questions to share with the group. So what I'm going to do first is introduce Stephen Thorne. He's provided us a wonderful biography. So for each person, I will give a bio and then they will speak. So here's what Stephen Thorne would like to share with us. Stephen is an award-winning writer, photographer, editor, and broadcaster. He covered the downfall of apartheid in South Africa and has reported extensively from war fronts in Kosovo and Afghanistan. His stories and photographs have been published worldwide, and his work anchored two major exhibitions at the Canadian War Museum. He is now on staff at Legion magazine, Canada's #1 journal of military history. Stephen, I'm so looking forward to hearing about this project, and so please go ahead, and thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you for the introduction, and very happy to be here and honored to have some of our veterans from Afghanistan with us tonight, along with Andrew. I was in Daily News for 34 years. 30 of them I spent with the Canadian Press, the National Wire Service. And for 5 years, I covered war in Kosovo and Afghanistan. Before that, I had done a lot of disasters and tragedies. And I guess I came away from that. I couldn't continue in Afghanistan, and I came away with that, with a feeling of that my job wasn't finished. And something that always ate at me was the fact that the wounded were rarely mentioned. They were usually passed off when an incident occurred. The acknowledgements, rightfully so, went to the dead, and there'd be passing mention of the fact that 2 or 3 or 4 or more guys were wounded, and it didn't name them. It didn't impart the nature of the wounds. People had no idea what these people were now facing. I nurtured this concept for years, and then I joined the staff at Legion magazine, and it was the first project that I pitched. And the advantage of working at a bi-monthly magazine as opposed to daily news is that you can take the time and the resources to engage in a project like this. So what I've done here is I put together a few slides. There's some of them are people that are in the exhibition, and some of them are people that that were part of the original project, but they didn't become part of the exhibition itself. But I would like to start with Mike and Leah. You can't talk about Mike Trauner and not talk about Leah Cuff. Leah is a lion. They both are. And their relationship, her unwavering support through the toughest of times, along with Mike's resilience and can-do attitude, touched me very deeply. They were among the first portraits I did for this project, and we've nurtured a good friendship ever since, and I value it greatly. Hélène Leceleur. Helene's a very thoughtful person, a very thought-provoking individual. She has grace and elegance, but she is a soldier through and through. She feels more than most, and I don't think that helped her in when the feelings started to kick in. But one of the things I found most inspiring in this project were the triumphs, big and small, and Helen's was big. And I'm grateful for the fact that she shared her story with me. And this photograph, I think, reflects hope and joy, and that's what I think she's found. Andrew Knisley. Andrew's from London. He lost his leg to a roadside bomb, and his story turned out to be about the bond that formed between him and Mike Trauner and Billy Kerr, a triple amputee from Afghanistan. During their rehabilitation, there were tales of racing wheelchairs through hospital hallways, driving hospital staff crazy, and not allowing each other to start feeling sorry for themselves. Andrew is one of the most positive people that I've met, but he's faced mountainous obstacles in his efforts to acquire benefits through DMD and VAC. Joe Corrali. Joe is a sailor, and one day aboard HMCS Calgary, he fell and hurt his back quite badly. He tried to suppress the pain, and he can continue working through what turned out to be a very serious disability that worked its way from his back through his hip and into his leg. Joe just couldn't accept the fact that this was the hand that he was dealt. His physical issues turned into mental health problems, and he found himself contemplating a jump off the stern of the ship in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Well, he got the help he needed, and he got married, and now he has a baby. And as he said to me, life is good again. Dan Matthews. This is a quote from an interview I did with Dan in 2003 when I first met him in Kabul. He was he was the only one of 6 Canadian soldiers who wasn't dead or wounded after a mine strike on their Iltis patrol. Rob Short and Robbie Barenfinger, paratroopers from the 3rd Battalion Royal Canadian Regiment, were the first 2 Canadians killed by enemy action. 3 others were wounded in that attack. Dan was in the 2nd Jeep facing the other way when a stack of anti-tank mines took out the Iltis in front of them. He had terrible survivor's guilt. I interviewed 3 of the survivors 2 days after the blast. I think talking about it helped Dan. Before I left in mid-November, he came to my tent and gave me this flag off his Jeep. It's now in the Canadian War Museum. Excuse me. This is Andre and Martin Renault, father and son. They were deployed together with the Van Duys. Andre was a master warrant officer, combat engineer, whose job it was to investigate mine and IED strikes, improvised explosive devices. There were forensic examinations. He literally wrote the book on counter IED measures and procedures. Like his dad, Martin was a paratrooper. One day in 2007, he hit a mine. Andre heard the blast from 15 kilometers away. The two of them are very close, a father and son relationship like I've never seen. Chris Clott. Chris was shot in the throat and the torso during a firefight west of Kandahar in 2006. His sixth and seventh vertebrae exploded on impact. Bone matter peppered his spinal cord. The 7.62 millimeter round is still in his body. After he was settled again at home, Clott's wife, Dina, took their baby and went home to Manitoba. She said she'd be back when Chris was self-sufficient. Well, that was all he needed to hear. He is self-sufficient, and she did come back. Jim McEachran. I met Jim in Afghanistan. Jim was a captain with the National Investigation Service, not a popular bunch. They were tasked with the duties of mortuary affairs, collecting the remains of soldiers killed in action and otherwise, identifying them, preparing them, and shipping them back to CFB Trenton, along with their report for final evaluation by a coroner in Toronto. That was the last stop on the Highway of Heroes. Jim confronted his demons through counseling and a healthy farm life in Prince Edward Island. Simon Mayoud. Nothing stops this guy. He was the first amputee to be deployed with Canadian forces in theater. Simon was a lieutenant, later a major in the Van Duys, and they were 2 kilometers out of camp one day in 2007 when Mayoud's armored vehicle hit a remotely detonated IED. 2 of his soldiers and an interpreter were killed. He didn't quit. He served as an aide-de-camp to then Governor General Michael Jean, and then he deployed again in 2009. He was told to stay inside the wire. He didn't. Steve Daniel. I've never known anyone so matter-of-fact about a life-changing injury as Steve Daniel. He was an elite paratrooper in 3rd Battalion RCR, a pathfinder and a free fall specialist. That's called that kind of jumping is called halo, high altitude, low opening. It's a way of a tactic used, high free falling and opening your chute at the last minute or actually last second. It's a tactic used to get into high risk areas undetected. One day in training, Steve had a hard landing on his 160th jump. It damaged his vertebrae and he was paralyzed from the waist down. Now he's a dad and a doctor, just an inspiring individual. And you can see that by his quote. And finally, Lauren Ford. Sergeant Ford is something of a legend. He's an airborne soldier in the 3rd Battalion, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, based in Edmonton. He's a soldier's soldier. You don't mess with Sergeant Lauren Ford. He survived the friendly fire incident at the Tarnack Pool Training Compound, southwest of the airfield in Kandahar on April 17th, 2002. 4 Canadian soldiers were killed when they were bombed by an American F-16 during a nighttime training exercise. 8 Canadians were wounded. Sergeant Ford almost lost his left leg. He did lose his left eye. At the time I took his portrait, he was still training paratroopers. So all of these people have had a tremendous effect on me. And I'm hoping that, and I know that they've had a big effect on Canadians across the country. And just by the shares and attention paid to the original stories, which are online at legionmagazine.com. It's helped accomplish what I had hoped it would, and exposure like this exhibition at your museum is a great thing, and I just hope that people come out to see it. Thanks.
That's wonderful, Stephen. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. It was very special to see some of those extra photographs, more than what are on display at Museum London right now. And for those of you who don't know, the exhibition is up until into February of 2022. So you do have time to come and see it. And it's wonderful seeing them on the screen, but I can tell you that seeing them in person is spectacular. They're quite large, they're impactful, they're very, very special. I'm going to move now to introduce Leah Cuff and Mike Trauner and Hélène Le Seller. I think I will do the three of you together, and we'll see well, actually, maybe I'll do Leah and Mike first, and then Hélène, and then we will enjoy what you guys have to say. So this is what Leah had wanted us to share. She said, throughout it all, the one thing that has not changed in what they like to call their new normal is the love Mike has for Leah and the complete adoration and love Leah has for Mike. On December 5th, 2008, Leah was awoken at 4:43 a.m. to learn that Mike had stepped on an IED. Since Mike's accident, Leah has become an advocate for Mike's health and financial well-being and put her own career aside to be Mike's caregiver. She is currently working on the Township of Petawawa's Accessibility Advisory Committee, which seeks to improve the town's livability, inclusiveness, and accessibility for individuals with disabilities. Leah has been a recipient of the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal for her fundraising efforts towards multiple foundations and organizations that support our servicemen and women, serving and retired. She received the Veterans Ombudsman Commendation just on November 5th for what she has done and continues to do for other injured and ill servicemen and women struggling with their own release, rehabilitation, and recoveries. And then Mike, my goodness, this is quite something spectacular to share. Master Corporal Mike Trauner served in the military for almost 19 years in Bosnia and Afghanistan. While on deployment to Afghanistan in 2008, he stepped on a roadside bomb, resulting in the loss of both of his legs. After only 69 days, Mike took his first steps and shortly after completed the 5K Army run, despite being told he may never walk again. He represented Team Canada at the September 2017 Invictus Games in Toronto, competing in both rowing and cycling, winning Canada double gold medals, and later attended the Paralympic tryouts where he was introduced to paddling and has held the provincial and national champion gold for 4 years straight. Recently retired from para canoe, he is now transitioning into para hand cycling in preparation for international competition and Paris 2024. Mike has earned numerous awards, notably including the Medal of Valor for heroism while in Afghanistan, presented to him by the Governor General. He and his wife, Leah, continue to contribute to their nation by helping charities and groups such as Soldier On, Renos for Heroes, Camp Maple Leaf, and schools. Thank you. Thank you. If you two, I really invite or looking forward to hearing what you have to say today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us here today. We're overwhelmed to be invited to this and share our story with everybody.
Yes, thank you for having us. Thank you, Stephen, for doing this. As you said, the images are quite large and very impactful. And honestly, just walking down the hallway, looking at the photos, they tell the story before you even have the chance to read it. Yeah.
Living through these experiences, it's very, very hard to actually present this to Canadians in the public. I find most people just have a hard time understanding what war really is about, and the impact it actually has on our country and the whole nation and all the people. But what Stephen's done here is he's actually presented all the stories of all the combined soldiers, whether mentally or physically ill. We get to share that expression through the museum and to the Canadian public, and they get a small understanding what it's like to be a soldier and everything that we've gone through, no matter how traumatic. For myself, even December 5th, 2008 wasn't actually my first time that I got blown up. I was actually blown up for the first time in September, just a couple of months before that, which actually led to my military Medal of Valor. But these are things that you remember all your life. They don't go away. And I'm glad that there's people like Stephen Thorne that have come forward to help us share our stories.
Yes. You mentioned the 343 phone call. Before the deployment, we actually met as a group because most of the people who were deploying that time were serving with Mike. So we were a small group of friends, and we knew that one of us in that group was going to get a phone call. And we talked about the possibility. We talked about what we would do if we got it, who we would call, just kind of have like a buddy system in place. And it just turned out that I got that phone call.
My first words to Leah when I first spoke to her was actually that I'm sorry. And I was sorry because I had changed our lives completely. I had this grand vision in my head, what life is supposed to be like. You know, you grow up, you get married, you have kids, you have a house, the dream, you live the dream, right? But that was changed for us, as it was for everybody that Stephen had actually presented to us tonight. We don't have any children even to this day. And well, we have dogs, which is great. But you know, it took us almost 3 years to build the house that we're actually living in. Leah dealt with that herself. There was no policies in place for that type of thing too at the time. So we actually had to write the policy. Well, not me. Leah had to write the policy, and she had to fight them to aid us and assist us to get accessible things that we need in the house to live my life. And not only was I missing my legs and now wheelchair bound at the time, I was dealing with, I had 3 major breaks in my left arm. I had 25 breaks in my hand. They almost took my arm together because a multitude of surgeons had looked at my arm and said there's no way they can fix it, until they just pulled a Hail Mary surgery and fixed it. And not only on top of that too, my thumb was blown off. They reattached that. I had shrapnel in my eye, so I had eye surgery, and I still have perforated hearing drums. So I definitely took a significant amount of damage. And it's hard to explain to people on a daily basis what it's like to live as a disabled soldier who's gone through so much. But I'm also very, very fortunate in the fact that I've made a very, very strong recovery. And as was mentioned right now, like I prefer not to look at my disability as a disadvantage anymore. I look at it as an advantage, because I've been training for the past 4 years for the Paralympics. Unfortunately, Tokyo came and went, you know, with COVID happening. It really kind of crushed my dreams a little bit. But now I'm on the cycling team, and I'm training towards to Paris 2024. So I took something that was super negative in my life and weighed me down. And after all doctors and people told me I'd never walk again and do these things again, you know, I really was able to spin it around. And I think Leah was too. And all the great things that she does now to aid and help other people, other veterans that have gone through similar experiences.
Yes. Being told you can't do something, we took those challenges and basically proved everybody wrong. So yeah, like there's definitely a way of doing things. Everything you used to do, you can still do, just differently. Outcomes the same.
Well, for me, when I look all the way back to day one to where I am now, I'm not even the same person anymore. I'm sure even Stephen can tell you that, you know, I've definitely probably changed over the years for sure, mentally and physically as well. But if you would have seen me day one when I was first injured, I mean, I wasn't even expected to live, because at that point I'd already passed away twice from blood loss. And the first time I actually woke up was on life support. And I just remember pain and agonizing feelings. And it's nothing I can actually describe to anybody. It's overwhelming, everything mentally and physically. So where I was then and to where I am now, yeah, I'm completely 360 from where I was.
Yeah. Like at the time, it was absolutely devastating. We didn't know what to do, who to talk to, who we could get to help us. We didn't know the system. We never had to rely on it before. And I had to learn a lot of it as we went along. And, you know, we still run into people now that, you know, feel really bad for Mike's situation and circumstances. And it's really not a sad story anymore. It's really hard to look at him when he's accomplished so much and has overcome so much and still going, you know. So
Those are wonderful thoughts, guys. Thank you so much. I really appreciate what you've said, and I'm sure we'll be coming back to you. But I wonder if I might now introduce Hélène Le Saleur, and if we could hear from her for just a little minute. So Hélène, also a phenomenal individual, retired Captain Hélène Le Saleur enlisted in the Canadian Armed Forces in March 1990 when she was only 17 years old. She joined the first female cohort in the infantry trade at the Régiment de Maisonneuve in Montreal. Hélène's love for service to her country led her to join the regular forces in 1999, where she served a further 17 years, primarily as a healthcare administrator. During her long career, Hélène has had numerous assignments and deployments, notably in the former Yugoslavia on 2 occasions, and in Afghanistan between 2007 and 2008. Sadly, Hélène's career came to an end in 2016 following a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder linked to her last mission in Afghanistan. Deciding not to give up in the face of this irreversible decision, she pledged to pursue doctoral studies aimed at finding new solutions to deal with the identity crisis that follows the transition to civilian life of military personnel living with an operational stress injury. Hélène, I'm so looking forward to hearing your thoughts tonight. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I guess what I want to say tonight is, at first I wasn't part of the project. Stephen already published the portion in the Legion magazine, and it was amazing. And I have so many friends inside that exhibit. And Stephen and I met at the Invictus Games, and he took so many great pictures of me while I was doing rugby, wheelchair rugby. So it was an amazing moment in my life. Fortunately, Stephen is living near where I live in Ottawa, and a friend of ours suggested to go down to the Gatineau Park and have some walks and talks, and we were doing these marches every weeks, and we had so many great discussions. And I remember Stephen saying to me, I need to have more women involved in that project, and I want to take you, Hélène, if you agree to be part of it. So I was like, okay, yeah, I can see, for sure, because I was, with invisible injuries, sometimes it's difficult because when you see those pictures, from Mike or other people who has physical injuries, it's very impactful, because you can see what they're suffering from. But invisible injuries is something that it's very hard to describe and show to people. So I was interested when Stephen talked about that and say, I want to have some pictures of people, living with OSIs. And I said, okay, well, I was thinking, how can we represent that on a picture? And he said to me, you know what, I don't see you looking, in a dramatic way, or, he said, no, I see hope in your eyes. And he said, I can see some light when you're talking about your story, because I got injured in Afghanistan. I live with chronic pain today because of that. My vehicle run on an IED when I was in Afghanistan. So I did sustain some physical injury, but I guess the most difficult thing I faced when I was in Afghanistan is losing 2 people under my command, living with the responsibility of losing people because you were the one choosing who was on the terrain and in which platoon. And so that was, I would say, the main difficulty I was facing back in Canada. And I was talking, with Stephen about that. And when he said, I want to see something that will give hope. And when he took the picture and then eventually presented my picture at the exhibit in Ottawa, I was so happy to be part of it, because yes, in the end, everybody needs hope. And we can see that with Leah and Mike, hope gave them, the will to push forward. And I guess that it's what I want to pursue also with my doctoral studies, to have people, have hope again, and think that something can be better, when you believe in it. And I guess Stephen was believing in us in that way. So again, thank you very much, Stephen, for that. And thank you for being a friend. You're a wonderful person, and we can see that what you want to create with this exhibit is very profound. So thank you again.
That was beautiful, Ellen. Thank you so much for sharing that. You brought up some really interesting ideas that I hope we can explore together, and hopefully other folks will have some questions. And before we get to that, though, I'm going to introduce Dr. Andrew Burtch, who is also going to share his perspective as the curator of the exhibition at the Canadian War Museum. So my little intro for Andrew goes as follows. Andrew Burtch is the Canadian War Museum's post-1945 historian. As curator of Gallery 4, A Violent Peace, he is responsible for all questions relating to conflicts from the beginning of the Cold War to the present day. He has worked to develop temporary and permanent exhibitions about the Afghanistan War, the Cyprus peacekeeping mission, the Korean War, military medicine, and war and games. So lots of expertise there. So Andrew, I'm really interested to hear about the place of this exhibition within the Canadian War Museum and your thoughts about that. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Oh, Amber, thanks so much for having us, and thank you for the Museum London for hosting the exhibition. I think it's a really important exhibition. It's one that I am oddly perhaps the most proud of, seeing as I had the least to do with it, because of course it is the labor that Stephen put into it, a passion project of going and seeking out these stories that are closely held, and often, as Stephen and Leah and Mike and Helene have mentioned, that are not reported as widely, and are deeply personal. These stories and the details that come out of it are not just about the military impact of an injury, the effect on operations and so on. It goes right down to the family, to the household, to the base living arrangements that, as we've been kind of isolated in our little pods from COVID all these times, we've been so close to these people, and dealing with these injuries while at the same time trying to balance and live a life is something that comes out in these stories. So one of the things that my job was as the curator of this exhibition was to essentially distill these stories into short 100-word or more, less in some cases, more when I could get away with it, accounts that capture the spirit and the elegance of the stories that Stephen spun from what was shared with him from the veterans, while at the same time being true to it. I'm going to, because I don't want to take up, having taken so much away from the stories already, I don't want to take up too much time from the discussion today. So I'm just going to run through a couple of slides with you today. As soon as I used to be a pro at this, here we go. And all right, here we go. All right, so this is my, I don't have the corporate PowerPoint logo at home, so I'm just using what the base logo. It won't be as artful as Stephen's. I included this. This is a photograph that was taken during the opening night of the Wounded, or possibly the media preview. And I include it in large part because it's a bit of a sense of what we're missing. And that is that being together. There's an energy that comes with an exhibition opening where people are coming together, where you are, in my case, meeting for the first time many of the veterans who shared their stories, having developed a parasocial relationship from reading Stephen's stories so many times over and over again, reading the stories in the news, double checking facts, making sure that everything works out just so, and then meeting them in person. It can be a bit overwhelming. It can be overwhelming for the veterans themselves too, because it's a noisy space. It's this is our North Corridor, which is right adjacent to our permanent galleries. There's the music that's coming from the galleries, the sounds that's coming from there, and it is I include it just to show the space that was in, and it's great because it's crowded, because a lot of people loved this exhibition. They came to it, and the reason the images are so large. And you've done a wonderful job installing them at Museum London. I do encourage people to go out and see it in person. Is we were quite intentional, myself and Britt Broughton, who was the creative developer on the team, were very keen to want people to have an encounter. When they approach each image, they're having an encounter, like a conversation. You are seeing someone face to face. You're hearing their story in as much as possible in their own words, as derived from Stephen's reporting, and in a wonderful quality print that Stephen arranged with his printer. Very high quality photographs and very high quality stories that are associated with it. And for me, this was really important to do because the museum is, among other things, committed to telling the story of all periods of history. And given that many of these injuries took place with Afghanistan, a war that was at that point ongoing, a war that Canada had been involved in for 12 years in varying capacities. And I knew that Stephen had done wonderful work related to his reporting in Afghanistan. His work was very formative in some of the temporary and permanent exhibiture that we have about Afghanistan. I wanted to have these stories told in this space at as large a scale as possible. And it follows on a grand tradition of documenting the wounded that result from war. And I'll just show a few examples from here. This is a reproduction of a page in a photo album from Lance Corporal Will Van Allen. He's from Rosetown, Saskatchewan, I'm sorry. And he enlisted in 1915. He served with E Company, a 5th Battalion. And in late 1915 or early 1916, he was very badly injured and returned to Canada as an amputee. And he, this image is, I'm not sure if you see it at the top of the screen. I think it says there's the triplets, Pat Murphy, Jess Matthews, and Will Van Allen, all men who had lost limbs in the First World War, and all of whom were able to return. This is something that was not as common, obviously, before the war. The war took a terrible human toll. Surprisingly, the number of amputees who returned home was still relatively few. It's around of the hundreds of thousands who served, about 3,000 returned home with amputations, or partial amputations, full amputations, in large part because surviving an amputation was so difficult at that time. Antibiotics didn't exist. Septicemia would set in, all sorts of complications would set in, but people who came back were also put to work and given different roles. But reintegration was very difficult. And so, but there's a lot of brotherhood, as you can see, even in the First World War, camaraderie to be found in between with all the people who suffered injuries and recovering together. In the story that Stephen told of racing down the hospital aisles and wheelchairs, probably similar tricks were played by these three triplets here, talking about their their injuries together. But the level of care that actually became a part of the landscape of Canada too. This here is a work called A War Record. It's by Stanley Francis in the 1920s. And this shows the intersection of Davisville and Yonge in Toronto. Whiz Bang Corner, named after a First World War munition named after the sound it made as it came in. And you can see there's amputees on the corner. This is right around the corner from the orthopedic hospital in Toronto, where so many of those who did have amputations or requiring physiotherapy or treatment following the war would receive their treatment, would receive their new prosthetics. And speaking of prosthetics, we've seen some of the aluminum and gyroscope and 21st century prosthetics in the images that were shared by Stephen at the outset. This was the state of the art in 1919. This is the prosthetic that was issued to Private Norm MacDonald of the 1st Battalion, Canadian Expeditionary Force, who received a bullet wound that was infected and became gangrenous. And he was evacuated back home. Eventually through a number of surgeries, resulted in amputation. And he was fitted with this leg, which is made of fitted plywood and leather and attachments in May of 1919. And he later became a lighthouse keeper in Bruce County. So he was able to continue on with his life. And but this would have been a very challenging piece to make. Continue to fit. The shape of the prosthetic always needed to be changed depending on healing and all sorts of things. So this would have been an injury that he would have dealt with his entire life. And so these are just some of the pieces that relate to physical injuries. We have many, many more in the collection, obviously. What's a little bit less prevalent, as Hélène mentioned, was the invisible injuries, is cataloging and documenting these. And so just a couple of examples from our collection. This is Sergeant P.J. Ford, an artwork by Charles Comfort in 1944, depicting a PPCLI soldier during the assault on the Gothic Line in Italy. And according to the records associated with this, Sergeant Ford sat down for this portrait just as he learned that his best friend had been killed. And so this is one that could be read into the soulfulness and the kind of neutral expression, the 1,000-yard stares, as some have said of this, that it is documenting in some early ways the battle exhaustion or early manifestations of what we now know as PTSD or operational stress injuries in that. The first one that we have that's in the collection, and I believe Gertrude Kearns is in the audience tonight, is her 2002 work, Injured PTSD, which captures someone who is suffering from an invisible injury, in this case, someone from a United Nations mission from Rwanda. At the time of the painting, the person was anonymous. I believe we know who it is now, and I probably don't know if I should say, but perhaps we can talk about it in the discussion. But this is apologies for the quality of the reproduction here. It doesn't do it justice. It's a very large portrait, but does show the unease and anxiety and perhaps some of the hypervigilance that comes with dealing with PTSD. And these were some of these artworks were featured in our 2011 show, War and Medicine, which was a partnership with Deutsches Hygiene Museum in Dresden and the Wellcome Collection Trust in London, which I worked with on Catherine, who's in the audience. Hi, Catherine. And so it was that I know Stephen, I knew his work. I knew that he'd gone to Legion magazine. And yet I clicked on, I think I was searching on Facebook one day, and to the extent that one searches on Facebook, existing on Facebook. And I scrolled up and I saw this portrait of Corporal Gordon Boivin, and I just stopped. I still stop every time I see it. It speaks to the entirety of the project, that this is an act of being open and sharing and vulnerable, of exposing one's scars and sharing it, to say, here I am. Here's what I've been through. This is who I am and what we're dealing with as himself, as a body of veterans. This is not a new story. It's an old story. It's a story that we who are not injured, who are not wounded, have a responsibility to count for and describe and learn And the second I saw this portrait, I thought, we have to work with Stephen. We have to work with Stephen and tell these stories and get it forward. And I was very fortunate that other people at the museum listened to me. That sometimes happens, it sometimes doesn't. But I will say that having the opportunity to be able to say, here's a project that will allow us to tell a story well, that is not often told at a time when people need to hear it. And I think that time is just as relevant now that the Afghanistan war is, for the moment, seems to be at an end, that is as relevant as when it first came out. And more than, I don't have numbers on how many people have come to see the show. I do know that I've took my son to it. I was able to meet with Andrew Knisley and his family when they were in town, and it was enormously formative for him. I've kind of shadow people sometimes at the museum, not so much now as I'm in my basement right now, but being able to say, let's see what people are seeing, and just to see people going one time after another to encounter these portraits, and being able to say, this is an opportunity for people to learn, and people are taking that opportunity everywhere it goes. This is from the first stop on the traveling tour. I was so pleased that it could travel. This is at the Lincoln Museum in Beamsville, where it was on display from January to March 2020, where, owing to circumstances beyond all of our control, it remained for some time before it traveled to Museum London, where I'm so pleased that it's located now, and it looks wonderful there. I thought I should have put a portrait in it. Amber, you did a great job in arranging it and situating it so people had a chance to see the stories and see Stephen's words reproduced at large scale at a welcoming space that's more open, allows for some time for contemplation. And I am pleased that if you didn't know, participants on the call, that there is a third venue that's being announced that will be the National Air Force Museum in Trenton. And that will be taking place from September 23rd to December 16th, 2022. So I think I've taken enough time away from the conversation, and I'd like to get back to it. But I just want to close by saying that with my enormous respect for the staff of Museum London, for the staff of the Lincoln Museum of Beamsville, and of course the enormous respect and debt owed to Stephen and to the veterans who shared their stories. Thank you for having me tonight.
That was wonderful, Andrew. Thank you so much. It was very fascinating to hear the backstory to how the exhibition came to be at the Canadian War Museum and how it developed. I didn't know all of that information, so thank you. We have begun to receive some questions. I'm very excited. I invite all of our wonderful participants this evening to share any thoughts or questions that they would care to, either through the Q&A or through the chat. We are monitoring both. So the first question that actually came in earlier is actually directed specifically at Stephen. And Stephen, I'm not quite sure. I know you are already contemplating your next project, but this person has wondered if you would ever consider photographing, do another portrait show, but of people who've spoken up about the military sexual misconduct and sexual trauma that they've experienced. I know that's quite a hot button topic and would certainly be a very impactful presentation. How do you think, what do you think about that?
It's certainly at the forefront of everybody's conversation right now in terms of the military and defense. Yeah, I would definitely be interested in something like that. Unfortunately, we're under very heavy restrictions at the magazine right now about what we can and can't do. So we haven't been out doing things. I've been working here in my basement for most of the last 20 months, just returned to the office a couple of weeks ago. And but that would be a very compelling project, I would think.
Add it to
We're
a
in the
list.
middle of it now, so.
Yeah. Add it to a list of projects so that you always have something to keep looking forward to. Now, we did have a comment, a question come through the chat. Now, for some reason, my chat has decided not to materialize for me, so I'm going to remember it as best I can. I think this would be for Hélène. It would also be for Mike and Leah. Now, and I think Stephen too. So we'll see what you make of it. This one person was asking about hope. Is it something that you can, that's a one-shot deal that you, or is it something that you always have to work for? And I beg your pardon to the person who asked or made this comment. I would be better off if I could read it, but my chat won't work. So, but they really were wanting to explore this whole idea of hope and how you can work to become more hopeful. And I think that's something we would all like to know these days. Hélène, would you like to try first to answer that one? And then we'll go to Mike and Leah.
Well, I guess even in during the wartime in Afghanistan, you need to have hope to continue, continue advance, continue to making sure that you will be successful one day at something. So I guess hope, it's something that we need all the time, and it's not something that you're aiming for a day. It's something that you're aiming every day.
Thank you. And then Leah and Mike, do you have some thoughts to share about that one? And
I can come at it from a different angle altogether, I guess. So suffering with the disabilities and injuries that I had suffered from, I wasn't given a lot of hope. So a lot of the hope that we had, we basically had to create it ourselves. We kind of learned how to master our own lives, as people talk about. We found our new normal. So we had to set our own goals and reach our own limits. And, after I took my first steps and started being able to walk again and do all these things again, I really realized that, I was able to create my own hope. It's nice to set goals for yourself and achieve them, and don't listen to what other people tell you can and can't do. Just do it for yourself, for your own benefit.
Yeah, like we started creating little milestones during his recovery. The first time being able to stand with no aids, no canes, no crutches, and then being able to walk 5 steps. And then that turned into, 100 lengths of the gym. And then that turned into, let's do the army run. So we set realistic goals to start with. Match them, meet them, and then create another one. So we did. And we still do that every day. Every day we have new goals, new milestones we want to meet. So it is something, like Helene said, that you need every day. You need it every day.
Stephen, I think that this whole project is about hope, really. And would you say that? Is that something that makes sense to you? Have I got it right?
Well, that's the way I kind of depicted the veterans in the pictures. Was they were in a dark world with that light. And I think it's most evident in Hélène's picture. But, I went through some rough times. Over 15 years, I struggled with PTSD. It was probably 10 years or more before I realized that's what I was struggling with. And I think that that the example that these people set really influenced my life and changed for the better. And to believe in hope, to believe in a better day is something that I took away from this project. And the better day finally came, and things are good. So thank you guys.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I could see the hope in those images too. Sometimes it's just simply by looking in a person's eyes, or again, the lighting, as you say, you've really crafted them so beautifully. I'm just looking at the chat now to see it was me. The chat was working all along. I just messed it up. So that's not unusual, but now it's all working. Okay. Okay, so I don't know that any of us are in a position to answer this, but you might have thoughts. This question is why individuals are not receiving the support required when their injuries are job related, and how do I advocate on their behalf? Now, that I'm not going to try to answer that myself. I'm going to put that out there and see whether the panelists would like to share some thoughts about that. How can people advocate for veterans for better care?
I'll take a small crack at this. I guess you could say that the veterans have to be their best representatives, along with family and friends, and you have to take an active role in just expressing the way you feel, because everybody feels differently, of course. But it's kind of surprising to the people don't understand what veterans might require, especially with physical or mental injuries. And I've seen this too from all different angles for people that are either medicating for pain or mental illness. And you get to see a lot of the different side of the coins from everybody across Canada, some pro, some against, but it's very, very much a case-by-case basis. And it's a very, very difficult situation, actually. You really gotta, I guess the best way to look at this would be to just, veterans have to be their best own advocates. And it's definitely good if Canadians speak their voices, speak out loud to actually make their voices heard, so that veterans actually get support from fellow Canadians.
Did you want to share any thoughts on that one, Hélène, or is that something that you felt you had ideas about? Or
well, I do agree with what Mike was saying. You know, we need to advocate for ourselves, and unfortunately, it's not all people working in the healthcare system that are, you know, aware of what was going on in Afghanistan, what's the reality related to those injuries, physical or mental. So I guess we have a responsibility to explain, which is unfortunate, because at some point, you know, mostly for the person living with PTSD, you know, every time you're talking about your story again and again, can create also new traumas, you know, just by the fact that you're creating the same situation over and over again. But the thing is, you need to express yourself. You need to ask and talk about your needs, because people are not aware, you know, of what are the needs, specific needs for veterans.
If I could just say that from my perspective as a journalist, to shine a light on stories like Hélène's and Mike's and everybody in the exhibition, there were conservative estimates. There were 2,000 wounded came out of came out of Afghanistan, and I think it's probably a lot more, especially if you consider the mental health issues that arose. And I think it was about 28 wounded came forward for this project. And I don't think any of them really wanted to do it. They didn't want the attention. It was an act of public service, an act on behalf of everybody who was wounded. And I think whenever you can shine a light in dark places, it's a good thing. And it moves people to hopefully, that's what one of the aims of this project was, to move people to care and maybe some to act.
I think another thing I noticed in the words you shared, Stephen and Andrew, in the text that you wrote, and also just in what I was hearing tonight, and also in your trajectories post-injury and recovery, as you work towards recovery all the time, is that there's support between retired and serving personnel as well, right? You guys are trying to help others. And I think that's something that's very, very important too.
I think the thing to remember as we go forward towards Remembrance Day is that wars end, their effects don't. their effects keep going. And as Stephen mentions, there's the official numbers for every conflict that are kind of recited by rote, but they don't reflect the reality, which is, there's administrative cutoffs, there's all sorts of things hard to keep track of. Some of the folks who were injured psychologically in Yugoslavia didn't know they were injured psychologically in Yugoslavia until 15, 20 years afterwards. Rwanda, Cambodia, Sinai, you name it. Some could not even name what was injuring them. We're in a much better place in terms of our understanding of the terms, the categories the names we can put on these things. It doesn't mean we understand what people are going through. And unfortunately, it is, no one wants to be resilient. I don't want to be resilient. No one who's suffered wants to be resilient. They have to be, so that they can advocate for what they need to. And even in the Second World War, when people were coming back and being given a fairly generous, in most cases, package of benefits, did so with the understanding and sympathy of veterans who were serving in Parliament, who had served in the First World War and didn't have that. And so, that's a critical mass. It's probably not likely to happen again, and hope we never get to that level of injured. But it's a long history, and one that requires that we tell the story. And so I'm glad that we're continuing to have that conversation tonight and being able to showcase these stories longer, because the needs as we go forward are going to become more acute.
Very good. So a question just popped up, Stephen, asking if you would continue to take photographs of more veterans, or is this a project that you feel like you've completed it, or if others came forward and wanted to share stories, where are you on this project?
Funny you should ask. Yeah, I've thought about a second go at this. We'll see. I work for a military history magazine, so I'm always thinking about new ideas and for projects of this nature. I have a couple on my plate right now, and we'll see. Because like Andrew said, they're not going away. And the issue is still before us. So, yeah.
Good. Well, post-COVID, when things open up a bit, it'll be exciting to see what your next projects will be. A few people were wondering about the supports you were given via, the various different organizations. What organizations did you turn to help you with your injuries? Did you go to D&D? Where would you go to Veterans Affairs? Where did you turn to when you realized, Ellen, when you realized you needed help, and Mike, when you were, and Leah, when you were out of the hospital and trying to take those next steps to building your house and moving on? Ellen, do you want to start?
Well, for my part, I was still in service. So normally the to go to place is directly within the service. So to the military hospital, to all the services that are provided in the health services system. But afterward, when you're transitioning, it's, VAC who's taking over for healthcare follow-ups and some other organization. But at first, when I transitioned in 2016, there was not necessarily a collaboration with communities. It was more like a silo system, which was when you were in the military, you were treated within the military. Then after you were, taken charge by VAC, and then if there were, some organization in the community that would be able to help, they were helping. But now I guess it's more collaborative as a system, which I think is a really good thing. I don't know, Leah and Mike, what you can say about that also.
Actually, I think Helene actually nailed it perfectly. That's pretty much exactly what me and Leah were going to say, with the exception of when I first was injured. I was going through the process. I didn't know what I needed. I didn't know who to reach out to, and nor did I actually know what was available to veterans to actually access. So I'm glad you brought that up, Elena, because it's exactly the way we went through it too.
Yeah.
So Leah, one thing that I thought of, and I heard you speaking, you talked about the friends, the backup you had, and the ones you were talking about who was going to get the phone call first. It makes me wonder whether, what kind of information were you given prior to Mike's deployment about what would happen if there were injuries, knowing that the likelihood was so strong? Was there any information that you were given as a military spouse or a military partner about what was going to happen or could happen?
Yes, Mike and I actually took it upon ourselves to meet with the Padre before his deployment. I don't know if that's something that they recommend to all spouses or families, but we did do that. And we talked about the worst case scenario and the possibility of him coming home. So I kind of had an idea of the process, just in case. So, I mean, it was still a learning experience. It was still scary. It was still a struggle. I don't think at the time Mike sustained his injuries, I don't think they were really prepared to have these guys, these men and women coming home with these kinds of injuries, or how to deal with the fact that, you know, the house that he lives in isn't accessible. So we actually ended up having an extended stay in the rehab center. Mike was in there for 14 months. And during his stay there, I would meet with his physiotherapist, his OT. I met with somebody in Ottawa who actually builds barrier-free homes for a living. Kind of put a plan together of what Mike would need square footage wise and different things. So while he was recovering, we actually took it upon ourselves to design our new forever, like our barrier-free home. And then we had to propose that to the military. Again, they had never had to deal with this because their policies at the time were renovating or modifying a home. Ours wasn't able to do either of those things. We had to build from the ground up. So again, resources, educating myself, but getting back to, preparing yourself for deployment. Definitely take it upon yourselves to ask questions if you're not sure about anything. Meeting with the Padre was very helpful. And that's something, again, I would recommend that families do.
If I can add a little bit something to this too, it's actually from the question before about PTSD. For myself, everything that Leah said, it's crazy everything that we had gone through, but for myself, everything I went through, I had to deal with just physical injuries at the time, and the military only let me deal with the physical injuries at the time. They didn't actually explore my post-traumatic stress myself until several years later, when they actually were, starting to treat me for it and get me some help and things like that. So, I think our case was actually quite difficult for them to deal with, because at that time, as Leah had said, they actually hadn't dealt with such catastrophic things to actually happen, and they weren't necessarily prepared to deal with the amount of injuries sustained from Afghanistan.
Right. Wow, thank you for sharing that. We don't have any new questions in right now, but I'd like to talk a little bit, or ask, if everybody still has time, ask a little question about the actual process of having the photograph taken. So Hélène, you gave a little bit of insight into that, the consultation between you and Stephen about what you wanted to communicate and how you should be positioned. I have been doing some research about portraiture and photography recently, and so now I've been taking a really hard look at these images and thinking, okay, why did they choose to wear that, and why are they posed that way? And am I overthinking this, or did you really think hard about all of these things? Mike and Leah, do you want to share some thoughts, and then I'll get Stephen to come in on it, and Hélène too.
I don't know, actually doing the photo shoot with Stephen was quite easy to do because we know him on such a personal level. It was such a straightforward thing to do. He said, just be yourselves, which is also a very, very simple thing to do.
Yeah, like we had a relationship prior to the photo shoot. Stephen actually shot quite a few pretty inspiring photos during the Invictus Games for our team. And we met him during that, and I think just maybe a little before, but as for wearing, you know, what you're wearing in the photos, I think it's just like an average, like this is an average day in our lives kind of thing. Like it wasn't a matter of planning a wardrobe.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, I think Stephen was really trying to portray the realism of the person and people that he was trying to portray. And I found it came across very, very easy for us. Easy, genuine. The exhibition is an experience, and I really, really highly recommend, if you're in the area or have family and friends in the area, just walk the halls. Yeah.
Hélène, I know you shared some thoughts already about that. So thank you, Mike and Leah. That was fun. Now I have new insight. When I show people the exhibition, I can say, Mike said this and Leah said this, and this is the real thing, not what Amber thinks, but what they said. Hélène, I really loved what you had to say. Did you have anything more to add? I mean, you were wearing a really pretty shirt, by the way, with the lace there.
I don't remember exactly if Stephen said something to me about what to wear or anything related to, you know, the photo shoot itself. I guess I just presented myself and he got the ideas and I was like, oh, okay, you know, because I'm not used to that. So I was listening to him and his vision about it. So I guess he would be more probably able to answer the question.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Stephen, what do you say? What did you say to folks when you were asking them to sit for these images and what you were trying to achieve? And
some people want to know if they should bring their medals, and just about everybody I photographed, most of them were out of the military. The guys who were still in, I didn't want to shoot anybody in uniform, and I didn't want to shoot people with medals. I just wanted just people like that everybody could relate to. And I wanted to show the results as best I could of their injuries. So I mean, there's been other projects, similar projects. This one guy did nudes of wounded veterans that showed all their wounds and stuff. So I wanted to show as best I could, as subtly as I could, their injuries. And I wanted them to wear dark clothing because that was easier to shoot. And I packed light because I traveled a lot for these shoots, and I didn't want to do lights. And so I did a lot of natural light shooting, which was kind of tricky because some places were better than others. And I think I actually called Mike and Leah back after the first shoot to do a second one. And I did that with a couple of people, and so I just wanted it simple and clean and just something people could relate to. That I think it was more impactful for people to see people just as they are, not in uniform, not with medals, not with dressed up or anything, just people.
I have to say, as a person visiting the exhibition, because I was the person who just organized how it should look in the museum, how it should hang. Not the curator, I'm basically the project manager, so I am basically the public looking at it, and I felt that way when I was engaging with the photographs. They're amazing. Something else that I heard, I was just going to ask a question about the Invictus Games, but somebody else has also said, did you get a chance to meet Prince Harry at the Invictus Games? Now that is an excellent question. Did you get to meet the Prince? But also you all of you mentioned the Invictus Games. Stephen, you photographed it. Hélène, Mike, Leah, you've been in them. And I think that links to hope as well. So what did being with the games, part of the games, mean to you? And if you did meet Prince Harry, did that help? Hélène, why don't you start, and then we'll go Leah and then Stephen.
Well, yes, I met Prince Harry briefly though. But for me, being part of that wonderful event was amazing, because I was struggling at recognizing myself that I was, you know, a wounded person, and being in the process of accepting it. And because for me, it was like, you don't see my injury, so I don't deserve to be there. So it was kind of a, you know, what I was thinking before going to the games. But over there, everything changed, you know, and even during the training camps that we had, you know, it was amazing to have, I would say, amazing discussions between ourselves and what we were going through. So it was an amazing experience, and I have so many pictures that I'm grateful for. And some of them are from Stephen, and I will never forget that experience. So yes, it was about hope again. So I don't know, Leah and Mike, I will give the microphone to you then.
So my experience starts, I need a revision surgery on my right arm. So what they did was they had to completely rebuild my right leg and my right arm at the same time, transfer all the tissue. And I went through, I think it was 18 months of recovery after the surgery because it was so extensive. And I got a message from Soldier On, and Soldier On had said to me, why don't you come out to Toronto? They're sending out the current team Canada to actually go compete in Florida. So when I got there, Prince Harry walked over to me and he issued me an ultimatum and a challenge, actually. He said, you know, I know everything's difficult. I know it's tough. I want to challenge you to come to the Invictus Games. And I want to see you there next year. And we sat and chat for a little bit. And it was really, really nice to relate to him as a soldier and not so much, you know, Prince Harry. Because he's just a guy. He's just a family man. Now, when I went to the Invictus Games, there he was again. I think I had about 4 or 5 interviews with him. And I don't know, there was a running joke within the team that I had seen him all the time. And he seemed to be talking to me all the time. But after I'd won my first gold medal, he's the one that actually walked in and presented it to me. And one of the words I actually expressed to him was, I feel like I've come full circle because of the Invictus Games. And as everybody knows now, like I'm working towards Paris 2024 for the Paralympics. And I don't think I'd actually be there without the Invictus Games, my teammates, and my wife, Leah, and of course, Prince Harry, for everything that they did to set me right on the path that I'm on today.
And we bring back hope back into this. There's an interview that Mike sat down with Prince Harry with TSN, and they talk about the power of sport, camaraderie. Like it's actually like the Invictus Games literally changed and saved lives. It was an incredible experience. Yeah, so Mike was challenged by Prince Harry and met the challenge.
I'm muted. I'm still muted. Look at that. I did it. Oh, somebody had to do it tonight. It was best it should be me. Stephen, did you want to say anything about being a part of photographing the Invictus Games and what it meant for you?
It was probably the most inspiring event I ever covered in my life. I mean, I've been in journalism for 40 years and nothing comes close to that. The photographs that I probably during that week shot between 10 and 20,000 pictures at least. And the vast majority of the pictures are about emotion, about support, and just the spirit of those games was incredible. And I actually will never forget watching two of the guys who were in this exhibition, Andre Girard and Gordon Boivin, sitting at the opening ceremonies with big names on stage and stuff, and they were just gaga over the whole thing. They were like two little boys, and I watched them, I think, more than I watched what was going on the stage. And just being around Prince Harry quite a bit, photographing him and stuff, he really has the common touch. And soldiers relate to him, and I think he relates to soldiers better than probably his own family. So, you know, it was a great experience, and it was wonderful to see the people accomplish incredible feats in facing unbelievable obstacles.
That's wonderful. Thank you. So I just want to do one last round for all of our panelists this evening before we wrap up. And so if I just want to ask each of you if you could share a thought about what you want people to take away from this exhibition. So if you were had a chance to speak to a visitor going in, what would you tell them? What would you ask them to think about, to take away? Stephen, since we've got you here, or I see you anyway, big on my screen, what would you ask or tell a visitor to think about or have them take away?
My whole aim for this project was to make people sit up and notice and care about these people and what they're going through or have been through. And that's all I want people to take away from this exhibition. And whether they're moved to act in one way or another, to write to their MP, or whatever, you know, whatever they are moved to do it. And just I just want to take this opportunity again to thank Lee and Mike, Hélène, and everybody who took part in this project. It was one small act of courage on their part, and it's made a huge difference, I think, and it will continue to do so in the future, I hope.
Thank you for that. That's wonderful. Hélène, what would you say if you had the chance?
I think I don't want people to enter that exhibition, you know, with pity, you know, saying that, oh, they're so unfortunate. Oh, that's, you know, I don't want people to think about that, because we did what we've loved, and we did sustain some injuries, and we're, you know, fighting on, battling on, soldiering on to be somewhere else in our lives now, and advocating for better treatments, better, you know, understanding. And I guess it's all about that, understanding. So I just want people to look at these stories, these pictures, saying, I want to know more. I want to be curious about what is going on with these people, you know? So I guess this exhibition will allow that. So,
that's lovely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very beautiful. Going to move me to tears, I swear. Andrew, you're next up on my little image squares, so I'm going to go to you.
Well, as usual, I mean, everyone's done the hard work, and I'm coming in, you know, kind of at the end to lamprey off of everything they've already said. But I will just say that I guess going in, I'd want people to just, especially since we get a variety of different people at the museum, including many serving people, I'd first of all just, you know, hope that they go in understanding what's in the exhibition, that there's some difficult stories there and some difficult accounts, and that they look after themselves. That's going in. Coming out, if they're moved, and I suspect that they will be, many are, is to take that next step and to learn more about what people are going through. We made a fairly conscious effort to try to balance the selection of stories that are there. There are others that we weren't able to include for space considerations, to provide the sense of the nature of injuries, psychological, physical, chronic pain, amputation, what have you. But there's so much more that people can learn. So I would encourage people to look at some of the other ways in which military service and some of the conflicts have led to injury, and what can be done to better support those that had served.
Thank you for that. And Mike and Leah, what would you say? Individually, of course.
I would tell the people, remember that we're the people that step forward to answer the call as, veterans and soldiers, that people in uniform. We weren't afraid to answer the call because we love our country. We never intended to be heroes, but, it is what it is. And some of us have paid the ultimate sacrifice, and it's just what happens being a soldier. Sometimes you take the good with the bad. And this gives people the opportunity to feel and experience a little bit of what it's like to be a soldier, and to see the mental and physical injuries that we've had to go through and have to live through. And like Helene had said, and don't pity us. We answered the call. We accept the responsibility to be soldiers, and we're very proud to have done so. One of the things my mother had actually said to me before she passed away was, "Why you?" And she said, "Why you?" And I said, "Well, why not me?" It's happened countless times before. As Stephen has said, there's so many people that have suffered through these injuries. So why not me? And it's not something that has bogged me down at all. It's actually changed me completely as a person, and I think it's made me better in the long run.
Honestly, I feel Steve, Helene, and Mike answered that question perfectly. I just really encourage people to go and experience this exhibition. Look at the photos, look at them, like actually stand and look at them before even reading the story. It will tell the story for you. It's a pretty incredible project.
Excellent, thank you. So I am just so grateful to all of our panelists this evening for giving their valuable time to share these powerful stories with us. I have learned so much. I've been sort of immersed in this exhibition for a little bit, trying to do it justice so that I could speak about it and promote it, of course, because I want people to come out. But I feel like I have such a greater appreciation for it now, having heard you speak. And I can't thank you enough, all of you, for taking the time to share these thoughts. And for everybody who joined us this evening, thank you as well. It's just thrilling to see so many folks join us from all over the place, and I'm very, very grateful to you. And all of you who are able, I do hope you will come to Museum London to see the exhibition. It is on here until February 13, if my memory doesn't fail me. We are open. I know you can check this on the website, but I'll give this one little plump. We're open until maybe things change, but for now, Thursdays to Sundays. We're open 11 to noon for immunocompromised folks and 12 till 5 for everybody else. We're by donation only. So if you feel like you would like to leave a little something in the donation box, that's great, but you're not compelled to. So please don't be deterred from coming here because you think there might be a hefty admission fee, because there isn't. We would love to have you come and visit us. And of course, don't forget that you can still see all of the photographs and all of the stories by searching Legion magazine and Stephen Thorne's name in the Wounded. So again, thank you to everybody, and it's been an absolute pleasure. And I hope we get to talk again, and thank you.